Hi, I'm Erica,
And I'm Rob.
and we're no experts, but today we're going to be talking about
Horror movies.
We're going to be joined by my brother Sam, who is not a real expert, but has a little bit of knowledge about different horror movies.
Lifelong fan.
Lifelong fan.
I would say, the whole thing to be an expert is 10,000 hours. I'd say I've probably put at least 10,000 hours in.
So I wanted to talk about horror movies because we recently just watched a really interesting show called Eli Roth's History of Horror, and it really got me thinking about how popular this genre is for a lot of people and how iconic a lot of these movies have become over time. So I thought we could start off by maybe each of us telling what our favorite horror or scary movie is. So Sam, what's your favorite?
Favorite or objectively the best?
Favorite.
Favorite, that would probably be Evil Dead 2.
Okay. Rob, what's yours?
I don't really have an answer for that. There's been some really good ones. The first one that popped into my head was The Devil's Rejects. Not much of a horror movie per se, but just a really, really good violent movie.
And I think my favorite one probably is Paranormal Activity. The first Paranormal Activity movie. They're all great, but that's my favorite one for sure.
Yeah.
Why do you think people like to watch scary movies? What do you think it is about them that draws such a big audience?
I'm going to let Sam take that one.
Yeah, so I'd say the best answer for that question, if you try and stretch it across every culture, is people have this innate desire that's ingrained to us from our evolution to have this fight or flight reaction. And I do believe people like to practice for how they would feel going either direction in that. And I believe that the horror movie kind of gives people a good idea of how they would react in a fight or flight scenario, such as just anything that's going on in that. Even if it's fantastical, I think it's probably something deep ingrained psychologically from our evolution.
I think in addition to that is that adrenaline rush you get, like from jump scares and the nervous anticipation you get from some of those creepier horror movies. Like they get that fight or flight, but they don't know which one they have to choose just yet, right? So you get that anxiety and the adrenaline, and it's kind of exciting because it reminds you that you're mortal and that you do have to do something to survive. And when you quote unquote survive that movie, you made it, right? You plowed through. I think, and people just like the event. They use it as a share point, I guess, for their friends and everything, right? It's kind of a shared experience, and it didn't really happen, but you all witnessed it together, right? So you kind of get that mild form of bonding as well.
So obviously horror movies have been around for a really long time. I don't know when the very first one started. I think a documentary we watched told.
Horror movies have been around since the beginning of movies.
Right. But they've obviously changed throughout the years. So Sam and Rob, what important components do you think a movie should have to be considered a horror movie? What are the important parts that they need to hit?
That's very difficult.
It's got to try and scare the crap out of you. At the end of it, it's got to try and scare the crap out of you. How that does that, there's many avenues, but that's what it's trying to do.
So you think that's all it needs is just a plot line that's going to scare the crap out of you, or something happening throughout the plot of the movie that's going to scare you?
In a nutshell, yeah. Again, how you do that, there's a massive spectrum.
All right, well, let's break it down then. What do you consider, Sam, to be an important component for yourself watching a scary movie? What is the most important thing to you that movie has?
For me, I would actually want to kind of draw a line in the sand that I think that there's a difference between scary movies and horror movies. Just because I think that something like Pan's Labyrinth or Dracula are horror because of they are not necessarily scary movies, though. And classic horror movies really weren't meant to scare, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and things like that, as much as they were these romantic stories. So I think that horror is a little bit different than just scary.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, the way you would define a horror movie is something that depicts things that normal society would deem horrific.
Yes.
Okay, I gotcha.
And then what do you consider a scary movie then?
Jump scares and ghost stories, thrillers, things that give you that anxiety, things that scare the shit out of you.
Yeah, I would say that they're both part of the same genre. Overall, that there are scary horror movies, but I think that there's also relaxed horror movies that are just, it's for whatever society at the time deems horrific, like you were saying, and it's definitely a very time-sensitive genre compared to other period genres.
So going back through the ages, I think one of the most successful scary movies, probably of all time, but it's probably The Exorcist, which I think a lot of parts of that movie still really hold up today, although I feel like nowadays we're kind of desensitized to stuff like The Exorcist, and there was a time there at the early 2000s where it was sort of like the, what do you call it? Possession movies were really,
they had a
flooding.
Resurgence, yeah.
And there was so many of them, but I really think that The Exorcist really holds a lot of the elements that force a scary horror movie.
I think that there's something that really interesting with, especially when you bring up the resurgence of that. But I think that those two eras of possession movies were for completely different reasons.
I think so too.
The 70s was about Satan panic, Satanism panic a lot in that kind of like white community. Whereas for some reason to me, when I think of the possession movies from the early 2000s,
like Emily Rose and all that.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's a more sexual thing, as if there's like this level of it that's kind of about sexual violence and subtext.
Okay, intimately violating somebody, as opposed to just scaring the shit out of you because the demon's coming to get you. Okay.
I think that, like I was saying, The Exorcist still holds up today because it has a lot of the elements that I think a lot of people do still frighten people in some way. So, you know,
it definitely holds up.
It holds up, and it's like they're just a normal, semi-normal, you know, white family living in, I think, Washington or somewhere like that. And, you know, it's not the adults that are really involved in really what the scary parts of the story are. It's a 12-year-old little girl. And I think that was important to do, to have the kid be the possessed person in the movie, because it's just something frightening that your own child can seemingly maybe turn against you in some way. She's been possessed by this demon, and she's acting out violently towards not only herself, but to the other people. And of course, there's the religious aspect to The Exorcist. So for people who haven't seen it, it's basically a little girl claims to be possessed by the devil. A young priest from the Catholic Church comes to assist after all the medical.
Catholic.
I'm pretty sure they're Catholic. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, not that
not
that important.
He's a priest, whichever denomination. And after all medical science has kind of failed that family, the church steps in. And the exorcism ensues. They bring in the old priest, who's the expert, and a lot of stuff happens. I think some of the most iconic scenes are maybe the head spinning around. A lot of people probably have seen, if they haven't seen The Exorcist, have probably heard of that scene or seen it somewhere. The pea soup, barf, projectile vomit across the room, the little girl floating, the bed floating off the ground,
and the one scene you could never ever get away with in today's.
It's the crucifixion.
The crucifix scene.
The masturbation with the crucifix scene. And I think that was so shocking in the 70s. I don't really think... I mean...
Like I said, you can't get away with that now.
I mean, I think this movie was post-Deliverance, so it was, you know, they really upped the ante, because I know Deliverance was scary for different reasons.
Well, yeah.
Which we can talk about later, but... and shocking for other reasons, which we'll talk about later. But definitely... a lot of things happened in The Exorcist that you either wouldn't be able to get away with today, or are just still so shocking to see sometimes. If you're young and you're watching The Exorcist for the first time, you might be in for a good treat. I know it doesn't really scare me anymore, but...
I don't think it's an age thing. I don't think it scares you that much because you've seen it a few times. Mm-hmm. I think if you show anybody that movie for the first time, they're going to walk away from it being at least a little bit affected.
My favorite part about The Exorcist, too, is that because it came out in a time where movie graphics and special effects weren't as they are today, with a lot of computer-generated stuff and CGI and all that extra stuff, that all of the things you're seeing in that are being done by people. So the set was refrigerated when they were in the room with the little girl, and so when you see their breath coming out, they're actually that cold. You know, when she's flailing around on her bed, somebody's doing that. They're making her do that, and she's using her own body to propel that.
It's a special effect, not a visual effect.
Right.
And it makes it feel more real because, in a sense, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that movie's really cool, and it's hard to sort of replicate a movie that, I don't know, like, that just has such an impact. You don't see them as well done as that today.
No.
The thing that I find really interesting about The Exorcist specifically, and it's something that just because of when you were touching on like all the points of the movie that were the most well known and remembered parts of the movie, despite the outrage about all the subtext that the movie had, a lot of like the imagery and messages that were not those big moments in the film, that I think that's
You're talking about like Ghostface or the Satan face?
Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. But I mean, a lot of more of the story beats and subtext that people were getting outraged over. Those are not the parts that people remember and think about this far out of place. So you think about the big visual effects moments, and I'm curious about, because that's not the part that I think is the truly scary part of movies like that. Sure, the big gross out scares are interesting to look at, but it is that subtext that you're getting, like the deep rooted fear that you brought in. That's part of a parent watching their child grow up and experiment with something new and different. Is kind of the subtext that I get behind a lot of that movie. Fear that your child is going to turn out to be this
demon.
As one of the bad ones.
Yeah, as one of the bad ones. That's kind of what it is, and turning to God to get it fixed. I'd like to know, like, why do you think that that's the part that doesn't hold up? The truly scary part of the movie. That's not the part that people remember. Why do you think that might be?
I think it's the nature of the medium. Movies are visual. People are going to remember what they saw, right? In the book version, it's different, and you take away different aspects of that storyline.
I think that's especially relevant when you think about something like The Shining, because I've read the book, I've seen the movie, and I've seen the miniseries, and there are scenes in the book that really, really stand out to me. But the original movie with Jack Nicholson, I remember very different things that stick out to me. Same basic story, and I know Stanley Kubrick changed it a lot from the book to make more of like an art film, I guess, and to experiment with different visuals. But I think both mediums were equally scary when you really got down to the nitty gritty of that story, because that was the dad going crazy and like turning on his whole family. And in the book, what makes it even more scary is that the character of Jack was nice at the beginning. He was trying to be a good dad, and as that story progresses, he falls apart, like, psychologically.
Yeah, the hotel destroys his mind.
Right, and he ends up turning on his family, which I think that's the scariest part of The Shining, because somebody that you love and trust and expect to take care of you is now the one.
See, and that's why I think that the movie itself is actually a lot scarier, because you can get that. I mean, if you're not paying too close attention to the movie, you get the idea that he's a nice guy from the beginning.
I don't. I get Jack Nicholson is you're a creepy little jerk.
You're paying attention. That's the thing. What I'm saying is, like, that's the thing that I find scary about that movie, is that the hotel didn't actually do anything to him in the movie version. It's more, I mean, it's a catalyst.
It was almost like he was always that way, and the hotel just brought it out.
Well, that was kind of the isolation, right? The solitary existence.
So then what do you think of The Shining? Do you think that there were ghosts, or do you think that they were just going crazy from being isolated?
All right.
Are we, like, figuring out a new subplot to The Shining here?
All right. You've actually brought up an interesting point, because this ties back to The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. Sam, when you were talking about the subtext and the fear being every parent's worried about how their kid is going to turn out, to me, that's an interesting perspective, and it's generational. And with The Exorcist, and because you mentioned the Shining, Erica, You have to remember that audiences back then were very different. They were far less educated, and they tended to be more superstitious. So with The Exorcist, that subtext didn't come out because that's not the way people thought. The thing that people were struggling with after the visuals of The Exorcist was this just a Hollywood depiction of something that was actually psychological in nature, and it was all hallucinations, and people, uneducated people, didn't know what else to do, so they brought in the church, or did it actually happen? Right? That was the fear. Is she crazy, or are we in trouble? Same thing with The Shining, right? Is it he just went crazy because he was isolated, or did the hotel affect him? The audiences back then, they didn't know. They had far less confidence in disbelieving the paranormal. And so that really spooked them when they weren't sure. When they saw a story, then they just weren't sure. It kept them up at night.
That's true. That makes sense, yeah. I mean, and then if you take it even further back, and this is the thing that I struggle to understand, but at the time of, like, Bela Lugosi, like, if we're going back into the Universal era,
yeah,
especially, like, the Dracula movie, there was a lot of people who believed the Dracula story, that they thought it was a historical book. Because it was based on an actual Vlad Dracula, as a real person.
They thought that they were getting a history lesson.
Yeah, and so when people were watching that movie, they were like, this is an event from history, and that I think that doesn't really hold up. Period. Horrors don't really scare people anymore.
Well, because we have knowledge at our fingertips. Back then, when those movies came out, they couldn't just go on, open up a laptop and Google something, or pull their phone out and be like, is Dracula real? Right?
That's it, right?
Yeah.
That is exactly the case. Like, most of the quote-unquote knowledge people had at the time was passed word to mouth, like mouth to mouth, right? So you had all these urban legends and fables and everything, and people had no verification one way or the other. And then they see a movie like that, and they're like, I can see it. Was it actually real? Right? And they don't really know.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, I mean, if you can apply that to, like, even in the 90s with the Blair Witch Project, like, people really questioned if that actually happened. Yeah, nobody was really sure.
They blurred the line, exactly.
Yeah. And it only continues changing as people's access to information changes. The way that people get their information means that you have to think of a little bit more creative way to be able to trick people into at least suspending their disbelief more than they normally would.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a really interesting way to take it, because it's all about the time period that took place. And 20 years from now, who knows how information can be transmitted, but maybe there's a way that you can still give that kind of bit of doubt towards what you're doing, the way the Blair Witch Project could.
Well, and thinking back about the Blair Witch Project, I mean, that came out, I was probably grade 7 or 8, so I think it was like late 90s. And I remember going to see it in theaters, and I don't know, like, back then, because I was a kid, I obviously, like, my first thought was, this must be real, because it's found footage, and I don't think there were many found footage movies like that. It was the first one. Yeah, so... Yeah.
And the ad campaign was brilliant.
But it wasn't just children, or kids, my young adults, I guess, who believed it. There were adults that believed that this happened, that something happened to those people, and it was ghosts or a witch or whatever, which is, really thinking back, like, ridiculous, because a rational human being kind of knows that you're not going to walk into the woods and be killed by a ghost. But we, as like a community, I guess, and around the world, believed that could have been real. So I think that was kind of unique, and it hasn't been able to be replicated since.
A big part of Blair Witch's effect was the ad campaign. I don't know if you're quite old enough to have picked up on it, but they had fake news stories out there. Police searching for missing kids, and if you've seen these kids, let us know. And
so they did all that.
Yeah, they built up to that movie,
and those people had to go into hiding.
Yes, they did. They did have to go into hiding, and it wasn't until I think it was the award show where Blair Witch won something that the kids accepted it and spilled the beans that it wasn't real. But
and people were mad.
They were, because they felt taken. They were taken, but they felt stupid for being fooled by the movie makers. It was a brilliant, brilliant ad campaign.
That makes me think of our theory about making a murderer. It's all fake. These people are all in hiding, and they have been, and they're just waiting for their moment.
Yeah, it could be.
And I can just imagine the outrage when they find out Stephen Avery is a character.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case.
Anyways.
There's so much controversy around that show. It's, again, brilliant ad campaign, if that's all it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, anyways, so that was a little off topic, but...
Sure.
The thing that, 2 points, actually. To me, I would still say that there was one found footage movie before Blair Witch Project. Have you ever seen Cannibal Holocaust?
No. Never even heard of it.
Okay. So it's this late 80s movie about found footage from, not supernatural, in fact, somewhat racist.
Okay.
So
I've heard of this.
Yeah, it's in the Amazon rainforest, and it was all filmed on location.
I remember this, actually,
a tribe comes out, eats people, and rapes a woman, and it's graphic when you get to that footage at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that movie is also scary because they killed an actual, 100-year-old tortoise, and people got real angry about that. So that's, I just like, for a timeline, that one, I would say, technically the first found footage horror movie.
Okay. Was it touted as being a true story, though?
Yes.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, people believed it for a while, but it's, again, very racial fueled kind of thing.
That probably ties back into your timing then, right? Those guys were ahead of their time, and it just didn't gain traction, right?
Yeah. But then the other thing I wanted to add in about the marketing behind the Blair Witch Project, I would consider that the first of a different kind, and it's been done with horror more than other genres, as far as I know. Are you guys familiar with the term ARG, alternate reality games?
Is that the one where you sign up for a thing and then the game will send you texts and emails and faxes, whatever you allow it to?
That's
one
way
to sort of
do
participate in the game and try and do the tasks or solve the mystery or whatever.
That's one way to do it.
Okay.
The other way an ARG can work, and this is the way the horror film Cloverfield, another found footage movie, did have a really extensive alternate reality game for it. In which there was just random websites that people just one day found. So someone must have sent it out from marketing.
Of course, yeah.
And then from that, there was it would connect to a series of articles and other web pages, and just all of this information that led back to a mystery that's bigger than the Cloverfield movie itself. And there was a lot of lore in that horror universe.
Okay.
That if just the surface casual moviegoer would never notice. And that's why one of the interesting things to me about horror is the community, especially because that's what that kind of marketing campaign does. From the Blair Witch Project or Cloverfield, that kind of connectivity for the community is something that you don't really see in other genres. I mean, sci-fi, you get the more conventions, but I would say that's all kind of the same.
It's all...
Do you consider sci-fi to be another subgenre of horror?
It can be. I would say.
Yeah.
I would say that horror, drama, comedy are like your three base genres, and then everything else kind of can be like a subgenre on top of it.
Right.
So that, do you think in the horror genre it would be like thrillers, psychological thrillers, maybe some action in there a little bit?
Yeah,
sci-fi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so just like there can be sci-fi dramas or sci-fi comedies. I would say, like I said, I think that the three main genres are horror, drama, and comedy.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What is your favorite type of horror creature? Like, if you wanted to watch a creature feature, what would you want to see?
Kaiju.
What's kaiju?
I mean, like a Godzilla or a Mothra, kaiju.
So like a giant lizard, okay.
Giant monster stomping a city?
Yeah.
Okay. A la Cloverfield?
Yeah, I would say, I like the big things.
I think Cloverfield was like a modern retelling of War of the Worlds, let's be real. It was almost the same, except for found footage.
It was more Godzilla than it was War of the Worlds.
Yeah, I guess. But aren't they aliens that come? Is Godzilla an alien? I've never seen Godzilla, believe it or not.
He's a nuclear experiment gone wrong.
Okay.
But
there are aliens, though.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
later on, there's so many different versions.
I mean, King Kong's a kaiju. I mean,
so like Mega Shark, that would be a kaiju?
Yeah, big creatures, grape ape, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what about Sharknado? It's not technically a creature, but it's a big disastrous element. Is it?
Well, yeah, what would Sharknado fall under?
I could say a Sharknado could fight a kaiju.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that if they did a Godzilla versus Sharknado crossover film, it would probably be a huge
hit.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Remember that
It would definitely
Sharktopus?
be.
Yes.
Oh no, the guy on the side of the boat.
Side of the
That
boat,
was
yeah.
awful, but great at the
Yeah.
same time.
Sharktopus looks like we made it in a weekend for about $300.
It was so bad, but so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. It was one of the best bad movies you'll ever watch.
Besides, nude nuns, big guns.
Yes.
That was great.
Have you seen Nude Nuns with Big Guns?
I have not.
It was so good.
This isn't horror, but it was a B action movie about these nuns that were taken as sex slaves, and then they escape and fight back, and they get all violent, and it gets pretty bloody. It's as far as B movies go, it's pretty epic. It's
like
good.
a grindhouse B?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's like
it's up there with hobo with a shotgun, machete.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
You know which one I really love though? Rubber.
No.
Would you
I
consider
think
that a
movie's
horror movie?
No,
Not even at all.
I would consider
It's-
that a piece of shit.
I like that movie.
It was a kind of a psychological thriller sort of thing, but
It
yeah,
was good.
It was interesting.
The
for
fact
sure.
that it
I
got
didn't
made
want-
into a movie, that gives it points right there.
That's true, because it had to go through how many people to get the green light?
Yeah.
That gives it some staying power, right?
Except to me, at the end of the day, to me, that movie is like, this is funny in concept, but then when you actually watch the movie, then you're like, oh, this isn't good. It's just not that good.
I mean, I want to meet the person who came up with the concept of a killer tire.
Yeah,
That
Give
just
me-
sentient
rolls
tire,
around and kills people.
Erica, if I could tell you something. If you give me 20 minutes and 2 grams of marijuana, I can be the person who comes up with things like that for you.
Maybe a tab of acid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Wow.
really easy to find that person. It exists within all of us.
There you go.
Suppose that's true.
I really love the disaster movies though, so like starting with something like Twister or The Day After Tomorrow.
Those are more action than horror.
They are.
though.
So do you think they even fall into like a subgenre of kind of horror, or is that just strictly action? Do you
I
think
think
maybe
they
you
can
have
do
to add
action
that?
horror.
I think they're like a fringe of horror because, yeah, it is supposed to depict a scary situation
Yeah.
and make you shit your pants because, like, oh my god, what if that actually happened? What would I do?
And,
Right.
and then at the
So-
same time, if you want to take it the other direction, I would say something like the Nymphomaniac movies are also horror movies.
I don't. I hate
more
that guy.
psychological horror, but
I hate that director. I think he's all about just how can I shock people and have no like. This is just my personal opinion, and I'm not an expert on it, but he just tries to shock people and call it art. Like to me, I don't like any of his movies. I think
Have you even sat through an entire one of his movies?
I saw through all of Antichrist,
No, you didn't.
pretty much.
No, you didn't.
I saw until she broke the guy's dick.
Yeah, and that was about
That
halfway
was
through the
enough.
movie. So you haven't finished his movies.
I would say that there's a lot of reasons to criticize Lars von Trier.
That's fine.
He is an actual Nazi.
Yeah, that's okay.
So like that's where it's like. But I mean, again, Nymphomaniac. I feel that I really enjoyed both of the movies, both volumes of the movies, and I do believe in volume 2. It has the scariest scene of any movie I've ever seen in the baby scene, like with the ledge of the balcony. That entire like sequence, that 5-minute sequence where she's getting railed by the black dudes, instead of being at home with her baby and it's just walking closer and teetering, that is probably the scariest sequence I've ever seen in a film.
Yeah, on the edge of your seat, like,
Yeah.
oh my god, are they going to kill a child? Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Did they kill the child?
No spoiler alert. We're not
No.
spoiling that. You're going to have to
Okay.
watch the movie.
I will never watch the movie because I hate that guy. The one movie though that, and actually has the same actress in it, that I thought was, it's not my favorite movie by any means, but it was such a scary movie because of the twist ending, was The Cement Garden. I can't get that movie out of my head sometimes. I think about it and just, have you seen that one, Sam?
You're welcome.
I've
Yeah.
never actually watched it. I am completely familiar with the story because you told me the story start to finish the first time you watched it, so I have never really had a reason to watch the movie.
It almost has a Flowers in the Attic feel, but it kind of goes, it gets
You told me that one
almost
too.
all the
Yeah.
way over that line without crossing it though. You never cross that line. You keep thinking something's going to happen and it doesn't. And then when something finally does happen, it's the last thing you expect.
Yeah.
In terms of who was calling the shots. So
Sure,
I'm not going to
okay,
spoil it again,
alright.
but it's if you haven't seen The Cement Garden, check it out because it's really good. So Charlotte
Gainsbourg.
Gainsbourg, yes. Very good movie. British movie, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
English movie,
Yeah.
Really good. Don't know who the director is of that, but it was really well done. It's a very good psychological thriller. Yeah. Keeps you guessing the whole way.
Again, you're welcome.
Yeah.
What's the first horror film that either of you saw that you can remember making an imprint on you?
I know this one. Scream. I was afraid to watch anything else. Leslie, my sister, and some friends of ours, when we were kids, used to watch scary movies all the time, and I was the wimp who cried upstairs the whole time they were watching them. So I have seen the intro to Carrie, or I did see it when I was a kid. I was too scared to watch the whole thing. Didn't even know what it was about. It's not really that scary now that I've seen it, but Scream was the first one that I actually watched start to finish, and then the second one was The Exorcist. So it was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go right in. So
there you go. For me, it was the first Nightmare on Elm Street. It was because up until that point, my little brain thought scary movies are going to keep me up at night and I shouldn't watch them. And then I watched Nightmare on Elm Street and I thought, these are fun. Because Freddy had all the clever one-liners and everything, and it was just fantastic. So, yeah, after that, I was in. I was like,
you know what's weird about Freddy Krueger is that he was actually, like, a child molester and somehow has become this big iconic character, and everybody seems to overlook that he killed children.
But he's still the villain.
He was a child murderer in the original series. They never went full child molester. That remake thing is where they said molester, and that kind of made it take it a step too far.
But people have always loved Freddy Krueger, but he was a child killer, and nobody thinks about that. They just love him. They want to keep seeing Freddy Krueger get up there on the big screen. And I think that's a testament to Robert Englund, for sure. Yeah. He brought that character to life so well, and I think when they did that remake, it was so bad because nobody can do that character justice the way he could.
For one, but for two, I get that they were trying to improve the makeup, but they made the guy look like just a burn victim, and you almost felt bad for him. It's like, I'm supposed to be afraid of you.
Thing about that movie, the entire movie, they're trying to give you this weird thing where it's like, should I feel bad about Freddy Krueger? Was he not a bad guy and he was just playing with these kids?
Right.
And then at the end, it's like, no, he was diddling them.
That's not the point, though. They fucked up that movie for sure. I mean, Freddy Krueger, he's supposed to make you shit your pants. He's supposed to scare the hell out of you.
Especially since he comes in your dreams, so there's nothing you can do. You can't stay awake. They make that point pretty
forever. Yeah, you can't stay awake forever.
They make that pretty obvious. So if you're one of his victims and he's coming after you in your dreams, you either,
unless your name is Nancy, you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You see, but my first horror movie that I can remember, and this one you probably wouldn't even know which one I'm talking about. I believe it's Ethan Hawke. Was the star of this film, and I think it's called Sound of Echoes.
No, Stir of Echoes. Stir of Echoes. It's with Kevin Bacon.
That's Kevin Bacon. Yes. I always get Ethan Hawke and Kevin Bacon in my head mixed up.
You would have watched that with me. That's where they find the bodies under their house, right? Or
in the walls, and he keeps they don't find it. He keeps hearing this girl's voice in his head, and he's like, I have to tear down this wall in my basement. And
people think he's losing his mind, and then it turns out there were these people buried.
It was a girl that he had murdered.
He had murdered?
I believe that's what it turned out to be, that he was crazy, and it wasn't a ghost, that he had murdered this girl when he was younger and buried her in cement in the wall.
And blocked that from his memory?
Yeah.
I have to rewatch that movie, because I don't remember.
I remember it being very good. I thought it was a dream I had for a very long time. Eventually I started looking it up, and I was like, oh, this movie exists, and it has a 2 out of 10 rating, so I should never watch this again, because in my mind it's a 10 out of 10.
It's actually not that bad. Some of the best horror movies are 2 out of 10, right? That's what makes them good.
Leprechaun.
Human Centipede. Come on, Human Centipede is great. Teeth, awesome.
Teeth was fantastic.
Yeah.
See, I am very strongly in the camp of, I don't like torture porn horror. I think that it's cheap and lazy.
Yeah, but I don't think the Human Centipede was torture porn. That first one was very psychological. Granted, he sewed people ass to mouth. I get that. It was really gross, but the original villain in that movie was awesome. I don't know who that actor is, but he played that role perfectly. And it was really scary. I thought the first one. I haven't seen number 2 or number 3.
Number 3 does not sound like a movie I'd like to see.
Alright, so number 2.
I hated it. The newborn part.
Yeah, well, whatever, that's fine. But number 2 was just them trying to up the ante. So it kind of went meta in the sense that the movie was about a fan of the original movie.
Right.
So, like, he's even got a DVD of it in his room and everything. So
it's almost like Scream 2.
No, it's kind of like Blair Witch 2, where the kids are like a fan of the movie, and then they sort of pursue the original, and they get into a mess and whatever. And then the third movie, they just went so far off the rails, it was ridiculous. It was actually the same actor who played the Doctor in the first movie. He, for whatever reason, is now a prison warden, and he decides he wants to create an actual human centipede, so he gathers up 25 prisoners and starts sewing them end to end in the one courtyard where they get their rec time. And it was just such a goofy performance by everybody. Again, the guy who played the warden, he just screamed every line, literally. It took him about 12 minutes to say something you could say in 20 seconds because he was screaming every word. Don't understand why. I don't really know what the hell I watched, but that was Human Centipede 3. I don't know.
See, and the thing that, like, to double back to my point on being firmly against this genre, I mean, it's fine that it exists. Different strokes for different folks and all that. But I don't see the appeal of something like that. Like, what is the horror aspect of something like this? Other
than the fear of being sewn butt to mouth to someone else.
Okay, well, I mean, you're kind of talking more about torture porn, right?
Right.
Okay. It goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's all about the times that we live in, right? So it's about depicting things that people deem horrific. So torturing another human being, people today are a little more aware of it, especially considering it's being covered in the news as happening in real life. So people are horrified by it. And
wait, the human centipede happened in real life?
No, I mean torture.
Oh, okay.
I mean torture. Do you remember the news stories about the American military?
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page here.
Yeah, no.
If that happened in real life, I'm pretty sure I would have heard about it.
I'm just talking about torture as a term. Okay. The movies obviously are going to sensationalize it and up the ante because it's a spectacle, and then we get ourselves into the Saw franchise, which originally was supposed to be psychological, right? And it was an interesting...
the first one was a psychological...
That's what I mean. It was an interesting thought experiment. That's the way it started out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turned into torture porn.
No.
Right? They were the guys that people coined the term after.
Yeah.
Right?
And especially like a movie like Hostel, which I haven't seen the sequel to Hostel. I don't know.
I haven't seen any of them.
But the premise of the movie is something that could actually happen and maybe does happen because it's basically human trafficking in some sense of the word, and that's what made that movie scary. But then again, it went into that torture porn kind of area as well, and I think that the reason why people like those movies are because it is something that could actually happen, and so it does scare you a little bit more than maybe a ghost story or a creature feature like Frankenstein or The Mummy.
I would say torture porn can work if it's a thoughtfully made movie. I think that a lot of people use the concept of torture porn as an out to be like, no, this movie is scary. Like,
but really,
they use
not.
it as a crutch.
Yeah.
When it can be used as a story element, and I think that it gets used as a crutch more often than it is used as a story element.
Yeah, well, a perfect example would be the entire Saw franchise. Started off as a good story, good thought experiment. It worked, and then in the later editions, it was what kind of creative traps can we come up with? What kind of
how can we kill people in the weirdest ways?
That's
and
it.
The grossest
Yeah,
ways?
and that's what they leaned on. Yeah, you're right.
So we had just a little technical difficulty there.
With the recording.
My computer kind of froze up. Yeah. So Sam won't be joining us for the rest of this episode, but I just want to say thank you to him. Give him a little shout out. It was nice having him here with us.
Yeah, maybe we'll have him back again, but in the meantime, he hopes you all have a nice day.
Yeah. So I think just to carry on with our conversation we were having, do you think that horror movies will ever make a resurgence into the theaters, like top of the box office kind of thing? I know that they do go to theaters, but they don't really bring in as much.
Yeah, you mean like a big blockbuster, like Marvel level kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that I'll see it in my lifetime, but at the same time, I keep hearing more and more stories about kids or people's wee kids, like 3, 4, 5 years old, watching The Walking Dead. So it's possible, yeah, that when these kids grow up and they're having kids, so like let's say 15, 20 years, it could be that, yeah, it's a whole family thing and that's the end thing. And because it's kind of like, well, it's not like anything, but with the Marvel movies, let's say, especially with the fact that they've gone to the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, what had happened, as far as I can tell, is that was a story that was like the big event when I was a teenager, and now they've pushed all these Marvel movies for the last 10 years, massive budgets into them, because it's guys my age that are making the movies. These are the stories they want to make. Right? They never got to see them when we were younger, so now they can do it, and they're going to. So with all the kids these days getting into horror early on, again, a la Walking Dead, etc., when they grow up to start making the movies, they're probably going to do the same thing, start putting massive budgets into them, massive ad campaigns, and draw the big audiences. So, again, within my lifetime, I don't know, but yeah, I can see it happening at some point.
Yeah, I agree. But anyways, I think we should probably wrap it up here.
Yeah, we've gone on for a little while here.
Yeah, but I'm glad that, I hope anyways, that you guys enjoyed that and sort of just talking about horror movies. And
sorry for the technical difficulties. We're going to try and squelch that for next time.
But yeah, so thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll tune in again next time.